matters, all right? Okay.
Do we still need to signal to you when we wish to speak?
You do, yes, you do. Yeah. But you'll get the running list? I will get the running list, yeah. Yeah. Well, the idea, of course, is that there won't be any need for verbalising you want to speak because it'll pop up on the chart. But we're all in learning mode, so let's see how it goes. And of course, it'll demonstrate any teething problems, which will be great. Okay, so thanks for that very much. So now we have an apology from Councillor Wilson, so I'll move that, seconded by Councillor Yong. Those in favour, against, carried. Now, when we come to the agenda, as I said in the email, first of all will take, if needs be, we will just take separately whether we add to the agenda the matter of the health and safety prosecution. And just some background on that, the Deputy Mayor asked me if this could be on the agenda, and the Chief Executive and I agreed, so this is the process we'd follow. And the Chief Executive has, as you know, circulated some confidential information to councillors by email, so everyone has received that or seen that? Great, okay. So, Deputy Mayor, I'm going to go to you as you wanted it on the agenda, and we'll deal with it separately.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. As councillors know, I raised the issue last week, and I'd like to thank the 5 councillors who supported an additional payment of $80,000 to Sam's 2 children. I did this because it appeared that council was contributing only $20,000 to the future of the children, and that was the amount of money that was in the public environment. In my view and in the public view, and I've had a number of emails on this, this was seriously inadequate and put the council in very poor light, in my view. However, the new information was circulated yesterday, and I appreciate getting that. I wished I'd had that information when I raised the issue last week. And I don't intend to politicise this tragic event, because nothing we can do, as I said last week, will change the outcome. But I am now confident on receiving that information about the children's future. And I'm satisfied that that future is protected. The difficulty, of course, is the privacy laws, and we can't table in a public environment what that overall outcome is for the family, and we don't have their permission to detail it in the public environment. So there's a lot of sensitivity around this and rawness in terms of the family and the privacy of Sam's husband and her 2 children. I won't be proceeding with the motion. That's not to say someone else might wish to move forward with it, and that's up to you, Your Worship. But I can assure the public that personally I am satisfied that the family has been taken well into account, and in particular the future of the children. So on that basis, and I'm reluctant to leave it as open like this because I do feel strongly that the public has a view that we let those children down with $20,000, and that is not the situation, but I'm not in a position to detail that in the public environment. So thank you.
All right, so Deputy Mayor, what you're saying is you don't now want to add the item to the agenda?
No, I don't.
Okay, so I'll just see if anyone else, Councillor McPherson.
Yes, Your Worship. I think the Deputy Mayor's speech just now is really unfortunate because it is, as he himself has said, has left a lot of questions open to the public. I think, and I did not know that he was no longer going to ask for this item to be in public excluded. He had, I had discussed this with him as the second of the motion a couple of days ago. We had discussed the possibility of information coming from the Chief Executive, and we had agreed to discuss that again afterwards. We have not. I think that at the very least there ought to be a discussion in public excluded, given that the Chief Executive has provided us information which we have not had a chance as a council to discuss. And I'm not saying what the outcome ought to be at the end of that discussion. I think it's unfortunate that we've even had part of those issues aired now as a process. I think given that the Chief Executive has sent us extra information of a public excluded nature since the last meeting, at the very least, to be fair to all parties, we ought to have that item on the agenda in public excluded, and I'll so move for those reasons. Okay.
Okay, so moved by Councillor McPherson, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, so that we would take that item and public excluded.
Yes.
Right. Councillor King.
So we had, the proposal was to discuss this in confidential today. Is that what was?
No, that's certainly not the way it was. I was asked to put it on the public agenda. And I didn't have any other discussions but that. So that's why I've dealt with it like this.
I think we've had a confidential report circulated, and this speech has just raised a whole lot more questions for the public than answers that can be ever given. And I'm amazed that this is even being spoken about when it could have been in confidential, and when the report was in confidential and the report can't be released to the public. It's just opening a wasp's nest, I would have thought.
So Councillor King, of course the item was in public at the last meeting, but we now have a motion and a seconder on putting it on public excluded. So have you got any other questions you want to ask? Otherwise I'll go to debate or vote.
Well, should the confidential report that got circulated be released to the public in light of what's just been said in this meeting? Because it's just a whole lot of questions that have now been left out there hanging for the public which are unanswered.
So Councillor King, I think the way I'm going to approach this...
Maybe go to the family and ask if they would be happy for it to be released, because...
the way I'm going to approach this
is playing games, isn't it?
I'm going to deal with the motion to add it to the agenda on the public excluded. If the councillors vote to consider it in public excluded, at that time they can discuss whether information should be released or not, and what process might have to be gone through to ascertain whether that can happen or not. And I see those as discussions that you can have then. Okay.
So, I mean, we're well into this debate now. Could the room be cleared and we have that discussion now, so that we can move forward in the correct process and bring it into public straight away, instead of tucking it back in, this is the last council meeting, tucking it back in behind confidential when everybody's left and the microphones have been turned off, the public aren't watching. And what do we propose to then bring it?
So Councillor King, as always with these matters, if that is your view, you can test that with your colleagues by putting an amendment. At the moment, we have a motion, which I've accepted, and we're going to vote on that. If you wish to raise an amendment, you can do so. Otherwise, we'll discuss it if the councillors vote to put it on the agenda.
I'm just talking about a bit of common sense here. You're the chair, and you've seen what's unravelled, and I just thought there might be a way through. Now that the waters have been muddied.
So Councillor King, that's my view, and that's the process we're going to follow. If you want to test your concept, you can put an amendment. Councillor Forsyth? And remember, councillors, we're not debating this now. We're simply deciding are we putting this on an agenda or not.
Yep.
If you want to talk about the substance of the matter, you can do so if it gets on the agenda. So, yep.
Yes, it's a question to the CEO. So I would like to know, so that I can make a good decision about whether we're going to public excluded or not on this matter. Are you going to present, if we go to public excluded, are you going to present any new information that we have not had already?
No, apart from the information that I circulated yesterday, no, I will not be producing any further information. But I just want to add that my strong recommendation, and I believe the advocacy from our lawyers, is that we have no right to make that information public. It is information that is confidential to the family. It's information that's confidential to the court process as well, and is confidential to Hamilton City Council.
Just a point of order and not to interrupt.
No, hold on a minute. He's allowed to raise a point of order. So what's your point of order? Turn on. Yeah.
It is on.
Yes, it is remotely.
Your Worship, I'm entitled as a councillor to raise a point of order. Well, I don't appreciate the comments from the side when I'm doing something that I'm legally entitled to do.
So
the question from the councillor was whether there was any new matters being raised.
Right.
The Chief Executive said no, other than what was given out yesterday. In terms of this council, as a group, what he sent yesterday is a report that specifically referred to the meeting today,
So what's your point of order? Because, I mean, we're getting into discussion now. What's your point of order, Councillor McPherson?
I'm making it. There is a new item. There is new information that this council, as a council, has not received at a council meeting before.
So the point of order is...
The answer from the Chief Executive was incorrect. There is new information for this council as a council. It's different from emails that go around. That's
right,
not...
Yeah, no, so Councillor McPherson, I think the question, I don't accept that's a point of order, but it's, I guess, a clarification question. I think the Chief Executive's answered the question that was asked, but to extrapolate that out, you are right, it is not yet a matter of record in the council process, but he wasn't asked that question. But we can deal with that if it gets on the agenda. Do you have any other questions?
Yes, I do, if I'm allowed to. Don't get interrupted again. So, has council, whether you or another representative, approached the family and asked the family whether they are happy to have any information that is currently or legally private, whether they would be okay or happy that that information is made public?
Not at this point, I have not. And the reason for that is the advice we had from our lawyers is we need to seek approval firstly from the courts, because it was part of a submission to the courts, and it takes a little bit longer than the amount of time available that I had.
And a follow-up question then, has the family approached you? Any representative or any member of the family approached council to make any information public?
No.
Thank you.
Right, any other questions? Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder of the motion. Are we able to put that up? This is groundbreaking, guys. We're going to see this for the first time up there on a TV screen. They are impressive screens. It is all black at the moment, that's right. But there we go. Wow, look at that. That's worth a photo for sure. I think it would be added to the public excluded agenda. I think, Councillor McPherson, that's the wording that you would be wanting, is it? Be added to the public excluded agenda? Yeah. Public excluded agenda, great. Okay. Right, does anyone wish to speak? No? Okay, so we're going to go to the voting. So we all know how to do that. You go to voting, good. Right, and you've got your screen there. Okay, so we're just going to vote on this.
I get a voting screen too.
I'm not voting. I think it's going to hop up on this one. We voted, is that right?
The motion was declared carried.
Okay, all right, thank you. Gosh, it's pretty impressive, isn't it? Okay. All right, so moving on, I'll confirm the... All right, Councillor Mallett? Good. Okay, I will now move that the open agenda be confirmed, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Councillor, just reminding me, you should have your annual report, right, and you should have a booklet with other attachments. So has everyone got all the information? Okay. All right. Any declarations of interest? No. There's no speakers in the public forum. Now, I have been advised that Paul Connell, who is here as the Chair of Audit and Risk to speak to the annual report, which is item 5, is not yet arrived because of weather difficulties and is due to arrive sort of mid-morning. So item 5, we have to wait until he gets here. So we're going to move to item 6. Now, the other thing is I've been advised that the people who are dealing with item 8 are here. So after we've dealt with item 6, we will take that item before founders, simply because they've arrived, and as a courtesy we'll deal with them first. So item 6 is the matter we're dealing with now, which is on page 7. So CE, you're speaking to this?
Yes, this is a standard process we undertake leading up to any end of term. And it just provides coverage in respect of delegations to the Chief Executive. You'll see within the report the outline of the delegations, and it also provides for certain mechanisms in terms of ensuring that the Chief Executive must consult at least with the Mayor-elect and so forth in respect of significant decisions. So I'd refer to this as a safety net, and happy to take any questions.
Councillor McPherson.
Yes, referring to point 4, the Chief Executive is not permitted to, sorry, that's in the recommendations, point 4. The Chief Executive is not permitted to use the extended delegations in respect of any politically significant matters that require input from elected members. So am I then to be confident that there'll be no discussion on the introduction of water meters during that period?
I think that's a short answer, is it, Councillor Chief Executive? What's the answer, please?
Yes, I'll not be introducing water meters. I'll,
Good.
Thank you, councillors.
Thank you. Any
and I won't even be
questions?
negotiating a Chief Executive pay rise either.
Yes, that's a question someone perhaps should be asking. Councillor Pascoe.
Yes, mine is a serious question, and it deals with exactly the same issue as Councillor Dave, and that is, how do you determine what is a politically significant matter, leaving water meters and fluoride aside, of course.
I think you can trust in my common sense. I generally err on the side of caution, and that's part of the reason that it talks about discussing with the Mayor-elect as well. So I will make that call, and the whole theory is that it's just a straightforward plain sailing for this period of time, and unless there's a significant event which may well require civil defence event and so forth, that's out of my hands. The rest of it should just be pretty much business as usual.
So if it was urgent in that period, you would then look to the councillors-elect and the Mayor-elect for that?
Yep, and I'm fairly transparent, so yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Yes, Councillor Mallett.
The dates are exactly the 11 days, Sunday the 16th until the 27th of October. So those are the days that there is no elected council, is that right?
Effectively, yes.
Okay, I'll move the recommendation, seconded by the Deputy Mayors. Any debate? Okay, so we might as well test the board again. Going to vote.
One vote and that's all.
Okay.
Motion was declared carried.
Look at that.
Okay.
Unanimous.
Very good.
Becca was
So
quicker than the machine, though.
Right,
So
thank
you rate my common sense, Councillor Dave.
All right, so the next item
reading too much into
is
that.
item 8, page 19. Which is the review of the municipal and domain endowment funds. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Morning, councillors. Just introduce Mr Andrew Ricketts and Mr Wayne Taino of PwC, who've been helping us with the business case. I'll just quickly overview where we're at with this project. It has been through the B&I a couple of times, a briefing, and through this the S&P on the 30th of August. The latest report includes information that supports the previous resolutions in the business case, as attached on page 51, and my colleagues to the right here are to answer any of those questions specifically related to that business case. Also, the results of the public engagement on page 23, both of which show positive results. The timelines on page 20 give the path forward for implementation, and the next report to Council would come back in March 2017 on progress. There's also, from our last meeting, advice on the Domain Endowment Fund management on page 22 and the tax status on page 26. So just as an overview, those are the new additions and clarity points that were asked from the S&P. With that, Your Worship, I'll take questions.
Thank you very much. Questions, Councillor McPherson?
Thank you. The CCO that the Hamilton Properties Limited, that the Domain Endowment Fund would be delegated to, or however it's technically termed, would that be subject to the Local Government Official Information Meetings Act?
That's a good question. I think it would be. I think I need to find out and come back to you.
Well,
it's actually a question that we should know the answer to. A CCO is subject to the Official Information Act. Corporate General Manager, you should know this.
Sorry, I don't have the answer.
Democracy, you guys know the answer? Brendan? You guys should know the answer to this. Sorry.
No, of course it's not.
Absolutely should know the answer.
Of course it's not. It's a business.
No.
If we take that question later on, make a quick phone call and be able to answer.
Yeah.
Okay. The Board of Governance, is there any restriction on membership of that, such as there has been proposed for the Water CCO of no elected members, or any other restriction?
Yeah, so it's exactly under our policy, under the appointment of the director. So as per that is correct in terms of our policies under the appointment for CCOs. So it's the same process, that's what we've directed it to.
So the Board of Hamilton Properties Limited would also not be open to the public for its meetings? I know Richard meets with himself at the moment as the only director, but once you're set up with some actual business to deal with, is that going to be in any way able to be treated as a public organisation? That could be included either within the contract that Council has directly with the HPL board. I don't believe it's within their constitution, the draft constitution we have currently, but it's if it was something that was a directive of Council, that could be included. So it was not discussed at the Council subcommittee that dealt with that aspect? No, but again, what we have included to ensure more the will of Council is the idea of having a contract direct with that board, and again, those attributes could be included if it was felt that was useful. So there was no the answer was there's no discussion. Then there was no discussion about the Lagoima question that I asked. Correct.
Point of order. Sorry, Dave. I'm pretty sure this is a CCO, so it will be subject to statements of intent and all that sort of stuff. So, is that what you mean by the contract between?
No.
Sorry, Dave. I'm not trying to interrupt you. I just thought you might have been getting some different information.
No, that's fair call. So, just to be clear, so the answer is no. Those issues weren't raised in the subcommittees or the previous S&P committee up to now. So you're raising them now. The concept is that the statement of intent is the document. Sorry, I'll start at the top. So the policy is how Council's wishes to utilise the funds. The constitution is the rules and the guidelines by which the HPL will run their ship. The SOI, or the statement of intent, is the way in which that board would then achieve the outcomes of Council. And then we have included the concept of having a contract directly with them, which enables Council to have more definition around things like the term of the contract or the term of HPL, around initial setup and cost structures, those sorts of things, of which these issues could be included within. Okay, so the discussion that
a previous council had over the veranda lounge, which is mentioned in here as an example, and where that decision was made in public and the decision was available to be, the minutes were able to be perused by the public. That would not be the case if a similar proposal came up for use of domain endowment land or funds.
So
once it gets into the area of the HPL, Hamilton Properties Limited.
So no, that issue hasn't been determined, but it could be under the contract. So no, that would be, that you're correct. But again, we could make that a determinant through the contract if that was a requirement of council. Now, and also point out that domain endowment funds, as it says in the report, would still be required to be spent as they are under legislation for the purposes of the domain amount under the Act. So,
but the details of the expenditure would not be a matter of public discussion.
Correct.
Yep, as the way the CCOs are currently set up.
Correct.
And that way.
As it currently is. Yes.
So the Business and Investment Subcommittee had a discussion about setting this up, but didn't discuss any of those implications that I've raised this morning.
No, those issues weren't raised then or at the S&P, which was brought to this full committee as well.
Okay. Was there any discussion at the Business and Investment Subcommittee about referring this proposed, which is essentially a delegation, to the incoming council?
No, there wasn't, but at the S&P there was a discussion around the timeline, and it was clear that that's why we included the timeline in the report coming back in March, because at any time until such time it is fully enacted, the new council or councils on that time can change their mind to rescind that, as is the right of this table.
Do you think it would be wise, given the in less than 2 weeks there will be definitely a new council, how new is yet to be known, but certainly at least partly new, that the whole matter be referred to that and discussed at the same time as other delegations are discussed?
Well, quite frankly, that's your role to determine that, not mine. You are in the job now up until the day that
I'm asking for your advice as a manager.
No, you didn't. You asked me what I thought, and my advice to you is that that's your decision as elected members about whether you want to defer that to council or not. As staff, we've put forward a recommendation to which you can accept or not, as is the case with every report that comes to the council.
But that was not something that was discussed at the Business and Investment Subcommittee at all? No reference to that part of it?
No, it wasn't, but also that then came to the S&P, which was discussed, and the timeline was asked to be brought forward, so that's what we've done. We've done as we were asked from the last...
At the time it came to S&P, the report that we currently have was not available, was it?
No, but the timeline as it was, and has only been adjusted to accept that. So the query, the point you're making about is should it be deferred or not, the timeline was part of that was brought forward from the S&P, which also put it to the new council.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to give you notice that I intend to move an amendment to this at the appropriate time.
Could I respond to the first question Councillor McPherson asked, Your Worship? A CCO is subject to Lagoima.
Say that again, sorry.
A CCO is subject to the Local Government Official Information Act, but as you're aware, there are various exclusions, so it's probably been proven that a CCO could probably argue some of their information is confidential given the nature of their entity and therefore exclude it from being able to release it under the Lagoima Act, but the starting principle is that it is subject to the Lagoima Act.
So there are a lot more exclusions in practice than there would be with the council itself.
It's the same act that we comply with. It's the same act we comply with, but the commercial nature of an entity may therefore dictate information to be of a commercial aspect, and therefore they can obtain one of those standard exclusions that we obtain.
So, just thinking of another example, the Ports of Auckland refused to supply some information to the Auckland Council, did it not, during the discussions on the proposed expansion of the port, and that's a CCO?
And they probably obtain one of those exclusions under Lagoima.
Yeah, and so the elected members themselves could not get that information, some information.
I'm not familiar entirely with that, Councillor, so I can't answer that question.
Thank you, Worship.
Just to be clear, they need to meet the legal test exactly the same as we do. Yeah, it's the same act, same principles, same legal test. Yeah. Councillor Pascoe?
Yes, my question is about taxation as far as the CCO is concerned. My understanding is currently the profits that we make on the endowment fund, interest and rent, in its present state is not subject to income tax, but will be if the assets are moved into a CCO?
That's correct. The CCO would be subject to your normal tax rate at 28%. The proposition suggests, in order to get tax efficiency, that we have a mechanism whereby we transfer assets and funds by way of loan arrangement, and then that's at a non-interest bearing cost as one of the options. The other thing is so certain cash would come through under HPL. Existing property assets would be retained within council to ensure we don't have any tax leakage, basically, because the proposition of those existing properties would remain there. There's the administrative aspect to them. And then for future development funding, it would be on a drawdown basis as required. But the concept is basically, if it's through a loan arrangement, then we're trying to minimise the tax obligation under HPL.
So that would be an interim, that because over time the 40-something million would end up in HPL anyway.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So separate from this particular report, it's my understanding that PwC made some submissions to the Select Committee on taxation of CCOs, which is part of the current local government amendment bill. Am I correct with that?
That's correct.
Yeah. And what sort of hearing do you think members involved in local government got from the Select Committee on that submission?
Rob, I'm unable to answer that because I haven't been party to that myself.
Okay.
So that was dealt with by one of my colleagues in Wellington.
Okay, so we haven't got the results of that as yet?
As of yet, no.
Okay.
Councillor Pascoe, this is the piece of legislation that's being put on hold at the moment. That's what you're referring to?
Yes, although I thought it wasn't in regard to the CCO. It was more in, I thought the part of the legislation that was on hold was around the ability of the Local Government Commission to become unilaterally involved in council business rather than the legislation around CCOs. But
you're right, though, that lots of councils, I think all councils actually, made submissions to say that the tax exempt status should flow onto CCOs.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that hearing was well received. In the time when I went up and did our submission, there was talk about that with other submitters and seemed to be well received.
Okay. The Hamilton Properties Company, in its earlier life, was involved in a number of development projects with other parties. Given the changes in taxation since the company previously traded, is it likely that the council or the Hamilton Properties Company Limited could be subject to what's now known as developer tax, which is a new being since its previous trading activity, that might result in not only tax on its net income, but also tax on profits that were previously capital profits?
I think it will be largely determined by what they decide is the applicable tax obligation in respect of CCOs. So I think that will be the key determinant in the answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a couple of questions. For clarification, I'm looking at page 8 and it talks about the quorum, and 6.19 talks about if all shareholders or their representatives are present, and yet later in the Constitution it talks about a majority of directors. I just wanted to get that clear, that it is a majority. The second question relates to...
so can you just wait while that's answered?
Can you just repeat the numbers that you're looking at, the clauses?
Well, I'm just a little bit confused by the fact...
What clause is it? What clause are you referring to?
6.19 says a quorum if all shareholders or their representatives are present. And yet later in the document, I've just misplaced the number, it talks about a majority of directors. So it's either all, it would seem sensible majority,
I think,
I think they're talking about two separate
Yes,
items.
I think
One
so.
is about the quorum of a shareholders' meeting, and one is about the appointment and number of directors. I think they're the different requirements, the different attributes of the constitution. I think they're not. It's not talking about the same requirement for the same activity.
Okay, that's right. So it was 9.6.
9.6.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's the first question. The second question
correct.
relates to alternate directors. I just want to make it clear in my mind that each director appointed, whether it's 3 or 5, will actually also appoint for themselves an alternate director. Is that correct?
No, I don't believe that is correct. I mean, the appointment of directors is still through our CCO process and policy that we have.
I think to be
Okay.
clear, you need to clarify that, because we discussed this at the B&I. There is no ability for any director to appoint an alternate in this constitution, is
Correct.
there?
Sure. No, that is quite correct. So we can clarify
Because that is stated in the constitution about an alternate director.
Yep, no, that's fair call.
What clause, Deputy Mayor?
It's in several places. I've just lost it.
We'll go through and clarify that point across each, because this is the draft HPL, it's a
Okay.
draft, and it would need to be adopted by the director, so those clarifications can be made.
That's fine. Now, on page 9, notice of meeting, 9.3, we talk about facsimile transmission. Has facsimile changed in meaning so that facsimile means a copy, i.e. emailing PDF, JPEG or whatever? So is this old terminology? Because the only fax machines that I'm aware of are down in the museum.
Yes,
So-
it is old technology, and the next point about electronic means would pick up. So again, this is the draft, this is just taking the original and we've just termed it up. So yes, those sort of
Well,
Okay.
with
drafts can be
respect,
taken in.
General Manager, it
Yes,
wasn't
Your
actually
Worship.
taking the old and just doing a few things. The Business and Investment Subcommittee did look very closely at the Constitution, and there were a number of changes made to it that were quite key.
Yes.
So have we
So
got
this-
the right attachment?
Yes,
one
we
with
have,
us?
but this one clearly was missed.
Yeah.
So we can
okay.
update it to, that's my point. Yep.
Okay, on page 10, this comes back to facsimile, point 2, in the case of posting. Now, 3 days posting is pretty optimistic. And I just wonder if under the current NZ Post delivery response, I've just put a question mark around 3 days, because it could be longer. And I just think under point 3, again, you've got facsimile transmission, and I just think that should be modernised.
Yes, agree.
Well, I think though, Deputy Mayor, you can fax electronically from your computer, and faxing is still available, and people do fax.
Yeah, no, I accept that, but I just
What
think
you're
we
saying
need
is
to...
some of these technical things need to be tidied up.
Yep.
They're practical things.
Okay, page 12 is disclosure of interest, 11.1. I'm just wondering whether directors should do what councillors do and provide a register of interests at the outset, or is that kind of expected?
Yeah, it's a normal process.
It's not identified in there, it just means that a director has to disclose an interest if there's a transaction.
Sure, so I mean, again, we can add that clarity in if you wish, yep.
Okay. So under action...
That directors have to advise of conflicts of interest.
Or complete a conflicts of
Yeah,
interest
sorry, yeah.
register, as we do.
Yeah. That's, is that,
The second point is around interests, and that is if the board decides that a director should be paid separately to do some additional work as a consultant. I just wanted to get that spelt out because there have been cases in the past in the business world where directors have gone off and have been exceedingly well paid to act as consultants. And then they sit on the board and make a decision. And I think we need to make sure that the Constitution reflects what Council's expectations might be around the use of directors for independent consulting, because it's hardly independent if they're reporting back to the board and voting on it.
I would agree. That's no problem. We can clarify that as well.
So that really relates under page 14 to the director's remuneration. I've got no problem with the being paid for travel and accommodation and other expenses. But the shareholders under 12.6 may by resolution authorise the payment of remuneration or of other benefits for services in any other capacity. So there is that opportunity for a director to be remunerated separately.
And so is your point that you don't think that should be included, or are you happy that that's included?
Well, I think we should be clear on it so that we don't have a board that makes a decision that it is fine for directors to be then paid for as consultants on particular issues. So I'm just making that point that you either overlook it and the board just pleases itself, or you specify that in the case of consulting work that should go outside to an independent consultant, not a member of the board.
Understand the point, and if that is the will of council, we can clarify that easily.
So just that point, because that has been a sore point in the past.
Yep. Understand.
I'm not sure that the Constitution is the place for that, because that would be part of the contract of appointment as a director. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, it is. I mean, we could include those sorts of elements within the contract concept. So that is exactly the sort of thing we could include, because the Constitution is, as you all know, is the rules of the organisation itself. But the ability to clarify those points that you raised and those of Councillor McPherson previously can be included within a formal legal contract that binds council to the organisation, to HPO as an organisation and entity in its own right. So whether it sits in the Constitution or probably more comfortably in the contract that we have with them, we can raise those points.
So that contract or the appointment of directors has to be signed off by the council, and that contract and the content of that contract will be signed off by the council in the timeline that's been provided. That is
correct. Yeah,
right. So you've got a running list of, because some of these issues that are raised have got merit.
Yes.
And given that this gets final sign off next year.
Yes.
There's an opportunity for the next council to make sure that they're satisfied with those sorts of points.
Absolutely. No issues with any of the issues raised. No.
And my final question, Your Worship. Oh, sorry.
I was going to respond to one of your earlier questions. Deputy Mayor, you mentioned about directors disclosing their interests. They are required to do that. Section 11.1 of the Constitution refers to Section 140 of the Companies Act, and the Section of 140 of the Company Act requires all companies to maintain an interest register and update that with interest, and it's quite a detailed piece of legislation that outlines what they've got to record and how they've got to record it as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And look, the final question is around, and just let me know what you think about this, is how does the board report to council, apart from statement of intent and the 6-month and yearly financials? I mean, is it a case of the chairman giving the CEO or the mayor of the time a wink, wink, nod, nod, or is there an opportunity for the governing body of this council to have some understanding once a deal is close? And I appreciate that if the deal ends up in the public environment before it's actually signed, but what ability does council have of understanding? Because there's also things like political sensitivity around issues that could put the council in bad light. So I'm just trying to find out, how does the marriage work at that point.
No, again, and so that's the concept of bringing that contract in, because the contract could define the realms by which the CCO would come back to council prior to, to inform council on what its decisions are and what it's doing. And that's exactly the concept of having that contract there, so we can define those parameters, because that issue was raised at S&P about whilst the CCO is set up to be free of political influence, and I think everyone around this table understands that, there is still a desire to understand, to your point, what is happening and be aware of decisions made. And I think being aware is different to influencing decision. And so I think the contract concept is exactly how we would be able to capture that in terms of what reporting requirements would be required and how they would then come back to council with information around what decisions have been made prior. And
I just have one last question, Your Worship, and that's around the appointment of directors. Is it proposed that this might be an IOD process? How are the skills defined by whom and when?
Yep.
So at the end of the day, I presume that council will have no say over the makeup of the board and the chair.
No, council has say as part of our, as I stated to Councillor McPherson, the process of board of and as in the report is through our CCO policy process now, which has a very defined process around job descriptions, a short list of candidates signed off by the CCO subcommittee as it stands now, and then approved at that level.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mallett?
Thank you. Thank you. Just a question on process. First, Gordon had some really good questions there. Just want who's taking a note of those things? Because I mean, okay, and how do we know that that's going to get followed up? What?
So we will need to bring the contract and through the process in the progress report in March, as it says in the report, we would bring these issues back in terms of a draft contract to make sure
So
that the
Councillor
issues
Mallett,
that
they can be
Councillor
included in the minutes?
Yeah, okay, because those are almost like amendments to what you're, and they're all good ones, or most of them are.
No.
Yeah, they can all be included in the minutes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And just to give Gordon a little bit of confidence, there are no surprises policies, there's major transaction policies, all that sort of stuff. I mean, these are part of the law, these are part of contracts and all that sort of stuff. So there's a reasonable framework within this basic structure already, yeah.
And again, the concept brought forward by PwC and endorsed by our legal advice was that the contract idea, which isn't, which is starting to become part of CCOs between councils, gives councillors in the governance level that level of security that perhaps isn't existing just through a statement of intent and a statement of objectives, because it actually binds the organisation more to ensure the very issues that the Council Chessman has raised, the Deputy Mayor has raised, and yourself. So it's an added layer of direction and protection around how that should work.
Why wouldn't those things be in, the contract issues be in the statement of intent? I mean, I'm just concerned that we're going to have a company constitution, you're going to have law, the Companies Act, we're going to have a statement of intent, and now and we also have letters of expectation. We now have this contract thing, which I haven't been aware of. That's called red tape, and that's called, I mean, I think you just lose clarity when you've got that many lines of delegation, or what do they call it, lines of reporting or something. This document says that, and this document says that.
I don't think it does lose clarity. I think they're different purposes, as I outlined before. So, policies, council's view on how to use the funds. The statement, the constitution is how the HPL will run in terms of their requirements. The statement of intent is the public document, which says quite clearly how the organisation HPL will work and to deliver the outcomes of council. And then the contract is the very things we talked about here in terms of between the two organisations, which talks about reporting schedules and requirements for information and those sorts of things. I don't think that's unduly worldly.
Is there an expectation that this contract will become generic over time? Because I'd assume it would. It'll have that you will report such and such, and then you leave the space, the dates, and then no surprises. All these sort of issues will become almost a generic contract, which you just change a few of the details for each of the CCOs.
No, I don't think it'll be generic. I mean, there'll be, because different issues for different different courses for different horses, if you like. I mean, there will be issues that are common around reporting and how we do that. But I think the report quite clearly says that we would like to see, and the timeline says that the appointment of directors would be done as early as possible, so that you can then negotiate that contract and be very clear about what that is to come back to council. So that again, we're actually trying to make the process as, you know, supply enough confidence for councillors in that space. So no, I don't think the contracts would necessarily be generic in number.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Leary?
Just one, Your Worship. On page 36 of the agenda, under 6.1, 6.2 annual meetings, we discussed, and it just may be my interpretation of reading 6.2 and then 6.4, but we discussed at the BNI meeting 6.2 in particular, which says, and if I'm reading it right, that the company doesn't have to hold an annual meeting. I'm assuming that is annual general meeting, if everything has been done and in accordance with 6.4. We had some discussion around that, and I recall us saying, look, even if all the job's been done and everything's been ticked off, it's good practice and transparent practice to have an AGM anyway. Am I reading that correctly?
No, you're right. So we should, if that is, if that's an error, we can correct that and make sure that there is an AGM and stipulate that that is the case.
Yeah,
there's no problem with that.
Your Worship, I think that was what we sort of came to, wasn't it?
No, it was.
Yeah.
We did talk about that.
Okay, thank you. That's all, thank you.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes, thank you. A couple of new points have arisen. On top of the 60,000 spent already on the consultants report, Kelvin, what is the anticipated cost overall of directors' fees and of any staff that might be needed, or are all staff just going to be council staff doing this work as part of their council job?
So that's included within the business case. We'll just find those numbers for you.
What page was that?
The forecast assumes that the amount paid to directors is on the basis of 60k per annum.
Total, is that?
That's 60k
Each.
per annum.
And
I'll point out that these are like assumed based on, you know, the information that we discussed with the management team. And then there's a support structure also within HPL, which assumes it has a general manager, some administrative support and a strategic property team. To the extent that, you know, we've got that support group will obviously depend on the level of activity that's occurred. Nonetheless, we had to make some underlying assumptions around that. And their primary role will be around the identification of land opportunities, assisting with feasibility assessments and the marketing properties, etc. So there is a support team under HPL, and the existing team within council will still be responsible for the administration of the properties that are retained within council.
what's the expected minimum cost of the support team? Let's say given a low level of activity.
At the moment, it's assumed to be around about 400k.
And if there are 5 directors at 60,000 each, and there'll be no doubt a chair's fee additional to that, we'd be looking at a minimum cost without any activity of over 700,000. Is that correct?
Yeah. We based our assumptions, just to clarify your point, we based our assumptions in terms of the directors, 60k each per independent director, and there are 2 independent directors assumed.
So the chief executive wouldn't be expected to, if he was still a director, to receive that? Sorry, Richard. Yeah,
correct.
Okay. So
and that's in our policy too.
Yeah, I understand. I was just checking the difference there. So we're looking at, it wouldn't be unfair to suggest $500,000 minimum.
Approximately, yes.
Yep. And that includes things like auditors' fees and that built into the running costs, or was that sort of additional to that, or those sorts of company costs?
You've got in addition to that a provision for some external consultants and operating expenses.
So the assumptions are on pages 62.
So I just want the ballpark is going to be north of 600,000 minimum.
Ballpark it would be.
Yep, thanks. Kelvin, when the council, through its normal council processes, approved the veranda development, which you refer to in the report, was that harmed or slowed by discussions amongst the elected members around the table?
Not that I'm aware of. I wasn't here at the time. But again, I think the difference there is that the veranda is a reserve-based project used for the domain funds, which is legislatively required to be utilised for. So I don't think there was too much debate in it. And whereas this HPL was looking at more commercial development projects in line with the strategic objectives. So I'm not sure. I don't know because I wasn't here, but I wouldn't imagine so, because it was a project in a reserve, in a domain, utilising the domain funds on that.
So it wasn't harmed, as far as you're aware?
No.
I'm not trying to trick you there. I'm not suggesting.
No. I'm just before my time, but I would imagine there wouldn't have been too many issues with it.
So why would those sorts of projects be better, in your opinion, better discussed and decided on under a company structure?
Yeah, so just to be clear, in the report we talk about that whilst that maybe the management of funds, it's quite simple that the transfer of the domain funds could actually just be a transfer back to council for any use into reserves. So it doesn't necessarily mean that for the domain funds that the HPL would actually just pick that up and run that as a project, as has happened in the past. The report actually points out that just for ease of management of accounting treatments and the like, that the money would just be transferred across back to council.
Isn't that getting a bit messy in terms of the tax implications and the governance implications if you're swapping all the assets over but bringing some back if they're associated with a project?
No, because particularly for the domain endowment funds, they need to be accounted for separately, and they need to be utilised for those specific purposes. So it's quite clear in that case, in that example that you bring forward.
Well, that was the only example you've mentioned in here, which is why I've homed in on it. Yep. And finally, is council currently meeting its policy objectives as set out in the Municipal and Domain Endowment Funds policy?
It's a current one,
Yes.
not the one attached here, yeah, the current
Yeah, and the
one.
current one, yes, it is. It's been it's utilised, and we utilise it to set us against debt. So that's the 5.5%.
So if it's currently meeting its objectives, what is the overwhelming need for change?
Because there's a feeling that as a vehicle, the utilising of the funds currently is a passive investment. It sits there, it doesn't accrete in any way, it doesn't accumulate, and it's just been sitting there against debt. There is a belief that if you can, in talking to the development community, if there is the ability to initiate developments in line with the plans of council and the objectives of council under its various plans, that vehicle under the HPL would be a useful outcome. Also, you'll note that there is a requirement that whilst we talked about cost, there's also a requirement to bring back a dividend of around $2.3 million, which is the offset against taking it against the off the debt. So that's the rationale behind it. It's a vehicle that council can use as a JV or for an opportunity to work with the development community, or in fact do developments to initiate, which we've seen in history.
The council can do developments in partnership with the development community right now as a council, can it not? By, for instance, providing land to a project?
Yep, it could, and the feeling is that, as you pointed out, that there has been debate around council's ability around this table and whether council should or should not do that. So the idea of putting it from a CCO, as we do with other CCOs, is to try and free it from the political debate and the potential for political hold-up and discussion, and allow it to move forward on a more commercial nature.
So where's the evidence of any political hold-up that would say that that's an overwhelming thing that we ought to be doing? I mean, I've asked you about the only example that you refer to here, and there was no evidence of any political hold-up that you have or that I know.
I hear about it for the last 7 months I've sat around the table, to be honest. I mean, Councillor Mallett will tell us that council shouldn't be involved in development because they can't do it and can't do it properly, and I think Councillor King has a similar view. So,
Councillor Mallett will certainly say that till the cows come home, and but where's the evidence? A view is one thing, and people are entitled to express their view.
I don't have evidence for you, so people can make the decision on it. The recommendation we've put forward is basis that this is a more efficient way to do it because we have different political views around whether it should be done or not. So
we have different political views. Is that when you say we, do you mean the elected members or the staff, or?
No, it's the management recommendation put forward. If you don't like that, you're able to put up a recommendation against that. That's the process, and you know that well, Councillor.
You sound quite defensive, but I'm trying to find
I think your questions are clear, Councillor McPherson, and I think you've exhausted the line, and they've been good questions.
I just want to see if there's any evidence as opposed to views.
And he's given his answer to that. Councillor Mallett, you're next.
Thank you. Dave was asking about the costs of the new CCO, and you said they were 400, 500k, is that right? Okay. Currently, is that what? North of 600. Oh, north of 600, okay. Currently, Nicholas is doing that, eh?
No. I mean, so there's no active development by council. But
he manages.
There's a management team. There's a team of 5 of them who run our strategic property purely on a lease basis and renewals basis, in the normal way you would manage a property program in terms of sales and assets and those things. But they're not doing active development or projects, which is what the difference is from this perspective.
So the CCO would have to at least generate 600, north of 600k to make it worthwhile from day one.
And by picking up the assets that we've currently got and how they manage that, there's a starting point for that.
So what currently do we earn from these assets? Sorry, it's in the report, but...
Was it page 10? Yeah, so on page 60 of the report, existing, the graph is, along the bottom here. So on the graph on the right-hand side to the bottom, endowment properties currently bring in 2.8 mil, investment properties 11.4, and...
That's the value of it.
Oh, the value, sorry.
And then the annual return currently.
The percentage,
the percentage on the top.
Percentages.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So it's so the percentages are on the boxes on top is what it brings in. Well, 7.5% of 11.4 million is, I'm not very good at maths.
Yeah, so the existing properties, the value is 11 mil and the return is currently about 7.5% per annum. 3.6 total.
And then there's 3.3% on the endowment properties and 3.3% on the domains. So
it's currently making about 800,000. Is it 7% on 11? 10% would be 1.1.
No.
On a weighted basis, it's roughly at that 5.5%. So it's about 2.3 mil in total before the costs of.
Hang on, sorry, didn't you say there's a bar there that says 11.4 million? That's how much is invested. And then I thought the return is in the box above it that says 7.5%.
Yeah.
So that 11.4 is the value of the existing properties.
Yep.
And the gross return on those properties is 7.5%.
Yep.
But obviously the bulk of the funds, 28.4 mil, is in cash, and that's earning 5.5% as a debt offset. And what's that equate to in cash? That rate? Sorry. Roughly 1.5 mil.
Okay, any other questions? No? Councillor King?
On page 25, sorry, give me a minute to get organised. So on page 25, paragraph 39. The cost of council's debts is 5.5%. Is that right, Chief Executive?
That's around the average, yes.
So why is council borrowing money at 5.5%? How much debt has the city got?
Top of my head, I can't tell you right now.
Wow.
350 million.
Through the chair, it would be
Sorry?
at 350.
350 million. So why is council borrowing money at 1.5% higher than commercial lenders can lend money for?
So that reflects our weighted average return, including the swap portfolio and what that covers out at. So that's our gross return, our gross interest. New debt that we bring on is much lower, but we've got a number of existing swaps that are much higher, so it weights out at that amount.
So if we're paying 1.5% higher than the public can get money for, what does 350 million work at 1.5%? What extra are we paying? Per annum?
Yep. Yeah, about $5 million.
$5 million per annum. So because we're in a swap situation, we're paying $5 million per annum extra for our money than what a new lender could go out and get money for.
It's a little bit on the basics, yes, but it's a little bit more complex than that. And this paper here isn't about the swap portfolio, Councillor King, and we're bringing a paper into the new council to explain all that. But there have been points in time where we've actually benefited from our swap portfolio. The reason that we maintain swaps is to ensure that we achieve a certain degree of predictability and consistency in our cost structure.
We've been consistently told that by us being involved in swaps, it's actually not costing us anything. But it is actually costing us $5 million a year, isn't it?
But it's over the period, yeah, I recommend we bring this back for the conversation about swaps, which is a report that's coming back in the new term.
But right now, it's costing us $5 million a year because we're involved in the swaps contract.
If you take a view over the period of the term to the swaps, and there's been periods of time when we've actually gained on our swap portfolio. In fact, the first few years I had to explain to the media why we had such large gains, and that was because we were getting upside on our swap portfolio.
Yeah, well, I'd suggest we're in a new era, and we've been locked in at 1.5% above the market for quite a few years to come. I don't think that's very clever. Paragraph 6. Public engagement. What sort of public engagement was done? What's the expectation for something like this? I see that there's some of council's friends have written in some reports at the back here, quite limited, and they're very well known to us. Each one of these, each one of the consultation replies. So how did these selective group of people end up being consulted with and not the public at large?
Well, it was. If you read page 23, you'll see the engagement process there. The decision was made that it wasn't by myself in terms of what levels of engagement we should do. The advice was it wasn't significant in nature, but we felt that it was still important enough to put it out there. We have rolled it out, as we've said. We've gone public. There was a number of media stories on it. There was all of the usual public engagement that we did. And what you found is that 10 interested parties have come back.
So you didn't approach any of those parties?
No, it says quite clearly, direct email to 74 of Council's key account customers and business customers, including social organisations like Sport Waikato and the Wisers Group and others. So we've been pretty consistent, pretty clear about what we've done. And 10 organisations, including some individuals, have come back. That's not incredibly unusual for a widespread campaign of public engagement. Sometimes we get a lot of engagement, as we have around Founders Theatre. Sometimes we don't. So we haven't. If your implication is that we've gone out specifically to people to ask them to specifically reply to us on specific natures. That is incorrect.
So none of these replies. This was general. You didn't specifically go to any of these groups. Like you didn't go to Foster's. You didn't go to...
So we've said there, right on the table on paragraph 32, direct email to 74 of Council's key account customers and business customers, the media release, the website, the consultation page. So we've gone a mixture of targeted groups who we know would have an interest, including those who are not just business or developers, if that's what you're implying. Also to wider business types and activities, and then we've gone to the public as well in terms of our public engagement and notification and using the media to do that.
Does this new CCO intend to borrow?
I would, until we get the new board of directors on and we know what they're going to do, Andrew, I can't answer that, or Councillor, I can't answer that question. But I would imagine not.
Does it allow for them to borrow?
Does the Constitution? Was it? Oh. No, under the Constitution, I'd imagine it would, but again, the idea of the contract, if we felt that there was areas of confidence that you wanted to put in there, we could include that.
So if they borrow, will it show on the city's books?
Yes, it would. Yeah, it would, because they're our. They still maintain. We still retain ownership of the assets. It's just the management that whereby the HPL has.
As the assets would show in our group consolidated books as well, yes. Councillor. So the assets and any associated debt would show in our consolidated books. Yeah. So I think that's a good point, actually, Councillor, that you raised, just for clarification, that we retain ownership of the asset. It is the management of those assets that is that we are diverging to HPL.
And is the council liable for the debts?
That'll depend on the structure at the time, and there's a lot more water to go under the bridge in terms of what that structure looks like.
Sorry, can I just have a point of order? Kelvin, you said that the Hamilton City Council still own the assets. Sorry, Andrew. The property company will own the assets.
No, the way that it's structured is that we own the asset as the management, and we are delegating the management and the decisions around those.
Okay, sorry, I thought the property company would own the assets, because currently the property company owns these assets.
No, so...
They're all managed.
No, the council owns them under the MEF, under the legislation. So the council is managing them for council ownership, and we are delegating that forward.
Yeah, no, can I just... Sorry, clarify.
Our
resolution...
Just say point of order first.
No, I don't have the authority to say point of order, I don't think. So
I think your point of order is actually a clarification question. Yeah. So maybe it's a tip for the next round of 3 years. Just say I've got a point of clarification.
Yeah, okay, point of clarification.
Because, you know, points of order are there to be used sparingly when you genuinely believe that you meet the criteria in the standing orders, and most of the time you don't. You just want a question answered.
Okay.
Anyway.
Your turn, Richard.
My turn, thank you. So our recommendation on page 20 of the agenda notes that assets and management of the Municipal and Domain Endowment Fund will be transferred. So the assets, you're right, Councillor Mallett, the assets will be in the company. We will own 100% of the entity, and we'll consolidate 100% of the entity and all its performance from a P&L point of view and a balance sheet point of view back into our consolidated financial statements.
So when the certificate of, what do you call those things? The property certificate will have Hamilton Properties on them, won't they? It won't have Hamilton City Council. Yeah.
Yep, that's correct. So there's a significant amount of administration to achieve in that respect.
Any further questions? Sorry, Councillor King, have you got any further questions?
So what we're setting as a parameter for return is 5.5% is what we expect this organisation to return. And as the city's cost of borrowings come down to 4%, which is what the market's paying, it will be set at 4%. It'll be at the cost of borrowing. Is that correct?
Oh, I think the policy sets the return to council at 5.5%, so that's the dividend to flow back. the actual return to be earned by Hamilton Properties will be higher than that, and that's evidenced by the fact that the asset portfolio, which is currently 48.5 million, is projected to grow to 62 million over the 10-year period.
So the policy allows for the return to be, is it locked in at 5.5, or is it at the cost of council's borrowing?
No, so again, just to clarify Andrew's point, the policy talks about 5.5% to ensure the dividend return at market to council, so that ensures that the debt offset that's currently set is covered for, and then the return upon any of the projects can be will be more than that on a commercial basis. And so, as Andrew said, there's an accretive basis to the return of the projects over time.
So we're looking for a return dividend back to council of 5.5%.
Yes, at the cost of market, that's a return dividend, because that then offsets the cost by taking it away from the debt, and then there will be further returns, possible dividend returns higher than that based on the returns of the actual projects overall.
Well, look,
That's the minimum
I think you need to be really clear here, and if people look at the policy document, which is page 28, I think you're talking about number 4, right? So let's get clear here.
And then you have to relate that to page 64 of the document as well.
So to make sure that you're actually answering, I think, the question that Councillor King is asking, that the policy requires the CCO to pay the council a dividend equivalent to the cost of financing at a particular point in time.
Correct.
And there's a mechanism in the policy that sets that. So at this point in time, it's X, but that may change,
yes,
right?
Correct.
Over and above that,
yes,
in the statement of intent, each year, the council could require further return,
yes,
right?
correct.
The policy provides for that?
It does.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And so, and that's the point that Andrew and we were talking to in terms of the assumptions we've made around the projections going forward.
So what return are we getting from these assets now in its present state, present structure?
Yeah, so we just had that question, which was...
So if the question's already been asked,
yeah.
then it's been answered, Councillor King, and I think...
I'm asking the question because it flows on from where I'm heading. So
right.
what return are we getting?
So if you turn
now
to
for the
page
assets?
60 of your report, as we did just before, there is 3.3% on the 2.8 million of endowment properties, there's 7.5% on the 11.4 million of investment properties, and 3.3% on the 6.5 of endowment properties, which totalled, I can't remember what the number was in the end. 5.5% of gross return.
So the report we were given at B&I, which we voted on, that brought us through to this point, indicates that we were getting more than that, that we were getting a 7% return on our assets at the moment, that were in the stuff that was in property.
Yeah, that's correct. That's the investment properties is 7.5%. That's right. The 5.5 gross return is across all of those different properties, across the entire portfolio.
Right, any further questions?
Yes.
Move it along, Councillor King.
Calvin, could you read what I've just given you, where I've highlighted, and what we were given at the B&I report, at B&I meeting?
So what's your point, Councillor King? What's your point? What's your question? What's your point?
Because we were told that the return was higher than that which
So-
has led us
No,
from...
sorry, but you're confusing, the number of issues why that will be different from 4 months ago with sale of assets and properties, but also because what you're asking is exactly what we've said there, that on the investment properties it was 7.5%, and what we're saying now about 5 point size, it's the gross return across the whole, both the domain, the endowment and the investment properties. We're not trying to, the implication is we've somehow tried to trick you. That's not what we're doing. This is the most up-to-date numbers we have.
Look, it says here the remaining 44%, the 3 properties valued at 10.5% are returning 8.1%.
And that, when was that report?
3 months ago.
Yeah, so things would have changed and we've got the most up-to-date numbers and it's still at 7.5%. That's relative change, I would imagine.
Do you have any other, do you have anything else to add to it, since you are the person who's mostly written the report, the business case report? Do you have anything else to add to sort of clarify perhaps if there's some confusion?
The only thing I can think of is that as part of your annual financial reporting, you revalue the properties. So these numbers have come from the property team in the last month.
Right,
That's
after the balance date, 30
Yes.
June, right.
So that's probably post-valuation, therefore it's 11.4 mil compared to the 10.5. The income or the rental hasn't changed, therefore as a percentage it's lower.
Right, okay. Okay,
Where I'm heading is that's the time of this report when we're getting an 8.1% return for our properties, which I struggle to see how that could have come down so significantly in 3 months.
So the
But
return
I have to
is,
take your word for that.
the valuation of the properties goes up, your income stays the same, so as a percentage it's lower.
because your income hasn't gone up at the
That's right.
equivalent rate.
Yes.
Okay,
So the properties have been revalued in the last 3 months.
Yes.
Part of the annual audit, annual accounting cycle.
I can also say through the chair that there was quite a significant revaluation of buildings. When we did the revaluation, there were quite large movements.
So when you go to page 28 on the municipal and endowment funds policy, so is this policy going to be revoked? What's going to happen to this policy?
so councillor, if the council adopts this policy, as you are aware, it will replace the existing policy.
So the policy that we're looking at replacing on 7.A says undertake new profitable investments with cash flow as cash flows allow over their life, which will yield substantially greater returns than we've previously achieved. So how is where we're heading going to give us substantially greater returns when you've told us that we're expecting a return of 5.5% when we're receiving at least that at the moment?
Yeah.
So the 5.5% is the minimum dividend return to council. So when we go back to the asset, the portfolio or the value of the asset portfolio, if we left it all in the bank currently, it wouldn't grow. So in 10 years' time, it would be worth $49 million. The way we've projected it, based on the margin earned from the development activities, that $49 million will end up being 62 million at the end of 10 years. So that 13 mil is the difference compared to putting it in the bank and having the debt offset.
But isn't that likely to happen anyway with our assets that we've got in property at the moment?
You've got 20% of your portfolio in commercial investment properties.
And aren't we capable of making a decision in-house to invest more in property because we've just cashed that up from recent sales? And don't we have a department in council that does that? And we've already been told that that department's going to stay exactly the same. The overhead of that department's going to stay the same. And we're setting up a new CCO that's what we were told. We were told that there will still be a team that you guys will refer back to that will still be there, as well as the second team being set
So
up.
to Andrew's point, there's only 20% of which are in property. The rest of it sits passively as cash. So there are, and our property team doesn't just manage those 3 properties. Our property team does everything from road stopping through to leasing and arrangements of all of the council-owned properties as well. So it's quite, it's a larger portfolio than just managing the endowment properties. The endowment properties is actually only a very small component of what they do. The reason of going to the CCO, as we've said continually, is that the CCO would enable more commercial development, which the property team doesn't do, and would enable to be done in such a way that it would achieve council objectives and return a profit to council, which offsets the debt and may also return a dividend and income stream. That's the rationale behind moving down this track.
So on our municipal endowment, domain and endowment policy, which we've just been told still alive now until we make this vote, on page 28 on 7G, strive to minimise operating costs. How do we justify that when introducing $600,000 more in operating costs?
Because because you're taking one line of a document and looking at it in isolation to the other, which talks about maximising profits and doing development opportunities. So there will always be a cost to generating income. It's the operating cost. What we're trying to say there is that we don't think that it should be an outlandish cost. We're trying to, in the policy, direct in any way which we use municipal funds, that it should be done in such a way that it strives to minimise cost. That's a relative clause to have in conjunction with all the others.
So how are we minimising costs by introducing another layer of management and $600,000 worth of costs?
Well, again, I think you're focusing on the one line as opposed to the other A, B, C, D, E, F and G lines and other clauses in that, which actually talks about what the objective of that is to achieve, which again is to utilise those funds, whether they are in council to do one thing or to otherwise use those funds through a commercial entity as a CCO to achieve a commercial return greater than the cost of debt. So cost, and it would be negligent if we didn't have that in there to say that they should try and minimise costs. It's part of an overall policy package.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm ready to move a motion unless there are any other questions. Councillor Pascoe?
Yes, I've just got one on clarification because I'm a little bit confused now. I had thought from the earlier discussion that the assets that are currently sitting in the municipal and domain endowment fund would remain with council, with the CCO company managing. But when I read 11B, it's quite clear in saying assets and management are transferred to the CCO. So I'm just sort of seeking clarification, because at one stage we were talking about those assets remaining within council but being managed by the CCO.
Cash will be transferred across and will be managed. The actual existing properties as they stand will remain.
Okay, so the motion perhaps does need...
Needs a bit of clarification.
Needs a bit of amendment just to be clear around that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Okay. All right, so I'm intending to move the motion on page 20 with just a couple of extras, if I may. B will become cash assets and management, etc. C, after the word constitution, include the words, with the removal of clause 17.1, which is a definition section on page 49 for a definition which doesn't apply, which is alternate director, and the removal of 6.2, which is the item relating to, on page 36, relating to there must always be an AGM. So those are constitution clause matters, whereas the other things that the Deputy Mayor raised, I think, were very good and practical things, and other people have raised as well.
Yep.
D would be the same, E the same, F the same. G, a new G, that the minutes are to record the matters of correction and operation raised by councillors. And that picks up Councillor Mallett's sort of thing, where's this list going to go? So that when staff come back in March next year, they will have that list with them, and then things will be able to be ticked off or not ticked off because we think this is a better way to do it stuff. And my suggestion is that, you know, you might have to go back and listen to the transcript and get it absolutely accurate. So with those additions, I'm moving that motion. And we've got a second. Seconder, Councillor Forsyth, yes.
So the staff recommendation is to accept this. Is that correct? It is correct. And on page 27, on paragraph 71, under risks, there's been no risk analysis done on going with the staff recommendation. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say there's no, you can't not address the risks when your staff recommendation is to go with it. You can't talk about the risks if we stay where we are when the staff recommendation is saying let's change.
So what's your point, Councillor King?
I'd like a report on what the risks are. I would like to know what the risks are. It hasn't been addressed in this report.
So I'm sorry, Councillor King, but you've had a time to ask all your questions, and I mean, you should have raised that as a question. You have sat through the B&I subcommittee, and a lot of those issues that you raised today have been discussed there. So, you've got, I guess, a more level of knowledge, and I know some councillors, particularly Councillor Gallagher, has also attended the B&I because he's been interested in this topic and put some things in too. No, I'm listening to Councillor King, don't interrupt.
Just like to remind you that at the B&I committee, several times I put forward an amendment that didn't get seconded, so it could never have been debated, because it never once did an amendment get seconded, so it could be debated.
No, it is correct that you didn't have support for amendments. That is correct. General Manager, have you got any? I'm just going to finish. I'm just going to finish with Councillor King's matter, if you let me. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Calvin? Just in line with risks.
No. So the approach has been around the report and whether or not, if you take the report, then I think the risk is accurate. If the question is around the risk of then enacting the program, then it's quite relevant that we would do a risk exercise alongside the development and part of the timeframes, which could come back as part of a report in March. So there's no, if that's what Councillor is referring to, I'm a little unclear, but if that's what it is, then we could do that as part of our progress report again.
Your Worship, I think we should point out through you to the Chief Executive and to the General Manager that the issue of whether risks in both directions should be addressed in staff reports was raised some months ago, and the Chief Executive he noted the point and undertook to see that would happen. So in other words, there's a risk analysis here, which I think is what Councillor King's referring to, talking about what will happen if it doesn't go through, the resolution doesn't go through, but there's no equal risk report in the other direction. That is something that I know that I asked for before and seemed generally agreed would be done.
So I'm happy to add to F at the end, and is to include a risk analysis. Because risk is about identification and mitigation or elimination by processes or actions that you take. So given that this has got to come back for a second round, then the council of that day can determine if they want to, if those risks are risks for them, and if they've been satisfactorily mitigated or eliminated. Okay, do you want to stick up on the board and see how we're going?
Your Worship, I believe that I notified you before
you did.
About an amendment.
I'll just get that up so that because we've got the new system, we just want to. You happy with just the inclusion of cash assets? That's sufficient?
Clarify with PwC, so if we just
Andrew,
amend
is that
the word
sufficient?
cash, is that sufficient?
And B? Okay.
So just to be clear, so on B, the cash is clearly the, thank you, is clearly the money in the bank mainly. And the management of the municipal domain endowment funds, that's a generic term to include all of its other assets, which is the buildings and...
All of it, yeah.
Okay.
Surely, Your Worship, there should be a clarification where it says funds. I think all normal definitions of that are talking about cash.
It should
be funds and property or something like that, some clarification.
Yeah, we just call it that, don't we? That's its sort of name. What is it called in the legislation?
You could call, and all other municipal
Because I
endowment...
don't want to add to my motion something that might cause ambiguity if the legislation has a name for it.
The legislation for the domain endowment is the Hamilton Domain Endowment Act, and the other one is the Municipal Endowment Fund.
Does it refer to fund in the Act?
Correct, because it's the use of the fund out of the
yes, and the
resulting
Act
assets.
also enables you to hold cash or property, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So I think we'd better, to be honest, councillors, just to leave it like that, because that is the legislation terminology, and it's clear what we're talking about, is it not?
Through the legislation and definition, yes, but I mean, happy to clarify if required. But.
So just to be clear, that means now that the cash, so that the money goes to the CCO, but only the management of the other things which are called, which are the buildings, which are called the municipal domain endowment and funds, endowment funds, beg your pardon. Yeah, okay. But ownership of the property doesn't go to the...
So we could add, of course, at the end of B, noting that the property asset ownership does not transfer. Okay, add that
Remains with the Hamilton
yes, that would
remains
that
with
would
the
clarify, I think, for everyone concerned.
noting that the property ownership, the ownership of the property assets remains with the council. And just to be clear, and this will be picked up when you come back, of course, next year, that if the CCO determines that it's going to sell a municipal endowment property or purchase something to go into the fund as a property asset, it would need to have that signed off by the council.
Yes.
And is that the way, yeah, I'll get to you, and is that the way Hamilton Properties Limited previously operated?
No, I don't believe it was. They
think
operated
so.
completely independently of that, and I think that what we're trying to put in is to address some of the concerns and issues around that is what we've put in place now.
Right. So, the way Hamilton Properties Limited previously operated clearly did not, the Act was not a barrier to management of the property assets, right?
Correct.
Right.
So it was my understanding in discussion and just through the history was that it was quite a lot more arm's length and independent than what was being proposed here.
I know a little bit about it. John Gallagher, who I think at the time was the deputy mayor, and I could be wrong, was chairman of the company too. So
Yeah,
there was some degree of.
He spoke to, he's spoken to us about
what's
going on in Kelvin's, had a
There's
session.
Ken Cunningham and.
Yes, I'm getting to everyone, and next one is you, Councillor Young.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. What if the cash assets with the HPL going to decide to purchase another building or property? That new property will be under council, right?
Yes. So they can
Would
decide
it be a bit confusing to have?
No, because it's the management of that would still sit there.
Still sit
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
council.
they make those decisions, and again, they bring it back through the contractual.
So when the property is sold, the cash will go to the CCO, not the council.
Correct. For reinvestment into another project or another development. But remember, the council is the shareholder of the CCO.
Yeah, I know. Eventually,
Yes, correct.
council, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I don't do anything. Yeah. Councillor Pascoe?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just thinking here, could there be some impediments if we had a situation similar to the Novotel Hotel where the council owned the land and entered into a joint venture with the hotel developer in the same situation that we have here, that if we owned the land, the CCO might have significant constraints in terms of entering into that joint venture without the ownership of the land with other developers. And it seems to me that the most practical way for the CCO would be to have all of the assets owned by the company, with the shares being owned fully by the council.
Correct. Yes. Yes. I'm mindful that everyone wants a cup of tea, and Councillor McPherson, I want you to give your written amendment. Oh, right. Yes, we'll put that up, put the amendment up, and then we're going to have a cup of tea. Okay, that's pretty short. Great. All right, we're going to break for till 11 o'clock. Thanks.